With OTAs beginning today for the Detroit Lions, one of the biggest question marks surrounding the Lions is Lions linebacker Alex Anzalone and whether or not he's going to get a contract extension with the Lions. Will he show up for OTAs? Will he show up at some point for the Lions for this season? A lot of questions, and I want to talk about it. So let's get right into it. So today, I'm going to give a little bit deeper thoughts on the whole Alex Anzalone situation than we have up to this point. Maybe some takes from different perspectives here, maybe both sides, what we could see happening down the road. I will say I don't expect him to be present at OTAs. I don't expect him to be there for the Lions. Shepard, that it sounds like he expects that he's eventually going to be there as a leader of that room as he's trying to get all of the, contract negotiations or maybe get contract negotiations started with the front office to potentially get a long-term deal here with the Lions, another extension for Anzalone. And look, I'm an Anzalone guy. Or I was an Anzalone guy since we initially brought him in. He was one of the guys that I initially wanted to bring brought in. That was the one that actually kind of happened. And then he got the extension on top of that. I got the signed picture of Alex Anzalone. It's hard to see. It's behind the logo right there. This is a guy. I love this dude. So I hope that Duracell sticks around. He's got a fantastic nickname too. What a new deal could potentially look like if it did happen. Salary cap situation means for a potential new deal for Alex Anzalone. Some of the moving pieces that could have to happen around that. The value of bringing him back versus what the Lions could be weighing in terms of making that decision. All of those things. So I just want to give some more perspective on this whole situation. But let's start there first. Anzalone is currently on the final year of his contract with a $7.25 million cap hit for this upcoming season with a $1.2 million void year after this season. Of course, if he's not extended, it's just going to become dead money. And if he is extended, would be thrown into that new contract. So a little bit of void money in there, but a $7.25 million cap hit for this year. But the question is the long term. Now, he's 30 and a half years old right now, so you'd be paying him beyond 30 years old, just to throw that out there. And this past season, production-wise, he missed a significant amount of time with injury, came back after week 11 for week 18 at the end of the season, also played in a playoff game. I thought he put together a really good stretch of back-to-back games to finish off the season for the Lions. On the season, he had 51 solo tackles, a 99 pass rating allowed, as well as 10 pressures. He played all over the field, which he has for us. He relies on what the front can do, keeping him a little bit more clean up into the second level. And when that's the case, he plays really well against the run. He's incredibly instinctive, as we've seen, and we know how valuable he is in coverage. And I'm going to show some plays of that. Before we get to that, just in terms of other deals around the league that I think a new contract could look like for Anzalone, there's two contracts that I think are interesting here. The first one will be Robert Spillane. This offseason, he signed a 3-year, $33 million deal, which is, of course, $11 million per season with the New England Patriots. He's a 29-and-a-half-year-old linebacker. That's the first player that I think is potentially comparable to what a new deal could look like for an Alex Anzalone. Now, again, the difference is Spillane wasn't under contract. He was a free agent, and Alex Anzalone is. So, essentially, I look at it as more potentially a 2-year deal, a 2-year extension on top of this season, the guaranteed money there. So, for that 3-year, $33 million deal, $20 million of that was guaranteed. So, about 2/3 of that was guaranteed for him. I think that could align similarly as well for an Alex Anzalone, potentially getting more guarantees for this season. And then, of course, into that next season, could have a lot of guarantees with the third year potentially leaving the out. You look at his production. Now, he had more production this past season, being on the field more often, and he graded out incredibly well against the run, but he's not as good in coverage. However, again, 110 solo tackles, a 111 pass rating allowed, 13 pressures. I think he could be in a similar ballpark, as well as a guy like Oluwakan, the linebacker for the Jacksonville Jaguars, who signed a 3-year, $30 million deal in 2024, which potentially could see a little bit of a rise just because the salary cap continues to go up. And I actually think Alex Anzalone has reposted something on that of the cap numbers expecting to go up. At 29 years old, though, $10 million per season for Oluwakan, who, looking at his cap number hits, $11.5 million this season, $16.5 million the next year, $15.8 the year beyond that. But a big part of that as well is he was also already on a 3-year, $45 million deal, so some of that's kind of rolling into the new contract. And this past season, 76 solo tackles, 98 pass rating allowed, 5 pressures on the season, a lot of grades that are similar to Alex Anzalone. So I think both those players, based on age and production, could fall into a similar ballpark of where an Alex Anzalone contract could look like just on a per-year basis, potentially more so of a 2-year deal because he's already under contract for 1 season. Maybe he gets to 3, but potentially more of a 2-year deal, or if it is a 3rd-year deal, that last year of the deal would definitely have a clear out for the Lions to get out of that kind of contract if that was the case. So a new contract, I think, would cost you somewhere in that range, $10+ million a year. Probably on the safe side is $10 million a year, maybe closer to $12 million for a couple of seasons here with Alex Anzalone per season. Now, on top of that, the next thing that I want to talk about is this salary cap situation for the Lions, because this is what matters, is looking at the full picture for the Lions. Lions have told us, hey, we can't afford Zadarius Smith. They told us that they couldn't afford him on the rate that it was, which was essentially a 1-year, $11 million deal, but that affects the next couple of seasons because it takes away from that rollover cap that you could push in the next year. What they feel like they can afford right now, but they couldn't afford that. So essentially speaking, they would have to view Alex Anzalone as, hey, if we're going to pay him that kind of money, we have to view him as this guy is probably significantly more important to what we're trying to do going forward than what a guy like Zadarius Smith would be, because from a per year basis, the number could be in the same kind of ballpark. So I think that's just one way to kind of think about it, of Zadarius Smith versus Alex Anzalone, if you just want to kind of put it in perspective a little bit on how much they would have to value Alex Anzalone. I'm not saying they shouldn't, just giving you an idea. Look at the salary cap situation for the Lions. While we don't know what the number is going to be set at next season because they're all projection based right now, if we did use Spotrac, for example, and we'll use their numbers because they're projecting a $307 million cap number next season. That was $279 million this past year, based on each team because of rollover cap. So last year, while it was set at $279, including the Lions rollover, it was looking at $306 million in terms of total cap space, or in terms of that total cap number for the Lions. We know right now they have about $40 million in cap space. So this isn't a question about right now, though that money does matter again to push into next year, because the assumption is the Lions are going to try to roll over a ton of money, which was like $27 million they did last year. They're going to try to probably roll it somewhere around at least $30 million, I would think, somewhere around $30 million next season as well. Because according to the projections, if we just take that $307 million cap number that is projected at right now, which is probably on the low side, but that's still a $28 million jump from year to year. Even if you took that number based on what the Lions already have allocated of $348 million, that would put them at negative $41 million in cap space, according to Spotrac, for next season. Financially speaking, the Lions right now have a lot of money already allocated next season. So there's going to have to be moves that are going to have to be made. But if we looked at it from a rollover perspective and how much they could actually push into next year, if they, on a safe side, having about $40 million in cap space right now, Spotrac, I don't think is including Tyleik Williams in that number, but that's going to be like a $1.8 million cap hit, because you'll drop off one of the $1.1 million. You'll include his $2.9 million. Those things will kind of subtract, and you'll get the $1.8 that's included into the cap. So even if you took that number, the Lions were able to roll over $30 million next season. Now you're looking at potentially somewhere around, negative $10 million in cap space. And then again, that's where you have to be flexible to make moves. And again, that's just assuming that their numbers are right, which they're not going to be in terms of the projected number. It could be higher than that. It could be much higher, which would be awesome. It could be much lower as well. Like you don't really know. So that roller cap is going to be very beneficial. Clearly, the Lions are seemingly trying to make sure that they have that flexibility into next year. It seems like that's what the Lions are prepared to do, is keep that money into next season. So with that being said, the Lions don't just have money laying around for future years, right? They have to be aware of who's getting paid. And the reality is the Lions have a lot of guys under contract next season, which is a great thing, because for a lot of their spots, they're pretty comfortable in who they have. They have a lot of their core pieces here. They have their quarterbacks will be under contract. They'll have their top 3 running backs under contract next season. They'll have Laporta and Wright. Their entire offensive line's under contract this next season, including Taylor Decker, including Graham Glasgow, 2 guys that potentially could have some outs after the season. Specifically, Graham Glasgow could be more likely based on what you could save there, but both those guys could have legitimate outs after the season. You would have Jack Campbell and Derek Barnes under contract. You'd have Terrion Arnold and his Rakestraw, Brian Branch, Khalil Dorsey, Kirby Joseph, Dan Jackson. Still need to get your kicker, but they have a lot of their core pieces under contract. So financially speaking, that's why it looks like that. And then, of course, as we always talk about, it's all about the way that you kind of set out these contracts in terms of timing. Now, the Lions will have flexibility in moves they can make. Some of the significant moves that we could see starting next season in terms of opening up cap space. Number one, they still have to pay Brian Branch, which I assume that they will, but that number is expected to be incredibly high, even just as a safety. We'll see how he performs with this year. I think that's important, leaving him at that safety role as they seemingly want to do and not have to move him because of injuries. If they can leave him at safety and he plays the way that he was playing before he got moved last season, I think he's going to make a ton of money. Ian Hutchinson and Jameson Williams, 2 guys they picked up the 5th-year options. Neither of them have gotten a long-term extension, but if they wanted to for either of those guys, they could look at pulling off a similar move to what they did to the Penei Sewell deal, which was folding that into a new contract to drop that cap number versus what it's actually set at for the 5th-year option, which is just under $20 million for Hutch and about $15 million for Jameson Williams. That could open up some space. They have the flexibility to restructure guys, specifically guys like Jared Goff would make some sense here. You could also look at guys potentially like Amon-Ra St. Brown, a couple of guys they could potentially look at restructuring. And then you also have some potential veteran cuts of a Dave Montgomery, which would save you $3.5 million, of a Taylor Decker, which could save you $12 million this year and $14 million a year after. Montgomery would also save you $9 million for 2026. And they need to do any of these necessarily. I'm just throwing out some options. Graham Glasgow, who you can move off of, save about $5.5 million into that 2026 season as well. So there's some veteran cuts that they could also look at making just to open up some cap space. So if you include, let's say safely the Lions were able to roll over about $30 million, and then you look at some of the flexibility they're going to have, especially when you think about like large restructures that could be in play with guys like Jared Goff, the Lions financially I think could get to a point where they could feel comfortable with somewhere around $10 million per season for Alex Anzalone for the next couple of years, assuming it's mainly a 2-year contract. Because when I look at it from a contract perspective, I would think that signing him through 2027 would be what the Lions would be really trying to kind of cut the limit towards, is because if you look at guys like Kirby Joseph, his cap number doesn't get over 10 million until 2028, right? So Kirby Joseph, pacing wise, a lot of it's through option bonuses, really no base salary, kind of have that as they go. You look at a guy like Anzalone, they could get that through 2027. They could kind of avoid when that thing really jumps into the void year of about 39 million.
Similarly, here with the DJ Reed contract, you noticed a big jump in 2026, which isn't ideal for timing here, but you also noticed that he has a pretty significant void number in 2028, and the Lions began to do that. So again, I don't think you'd want overlapping of he's got to get paid through that year, and then you also have this void numbers that are also hitting on the same time.
We're to look at a guy like Derek Barnes. Derek Barnes is a $2.5 million cap hit this season, and then it goes to $9.2 million and then $4.3 million, and then he has the over $7 million void year. But again, that'd be 2028. So again, that's another guy that you could potentially offset in terms of timing.
It would seemingly be ideal for the Lions to have the significant number be in 2027 for an Alex Anzalone deal with an out, as we're going to look at a Robert Spillane deal that's very similarly set up. Highest cap numbers in 2027, because for the Lions, a lot of the new deals they set in 2026, those numbers rise and then drop in 2027. The problem is these extensions that are coming with Hutchinson and potentially a Jameson Williams and a Brian Branch is when did those numbers peak? Because based on the way it's set up, it looks as if the Lions could try to push those numbers up in 2027, knowing they have a lot of dead money set for 2028, because they don't want all their cap numbers to rise at the same time they also have all this dead money due, because at that point you're paying a lot of the same money at the exact same time when everything becomes accelerated. So instead, it almost seems like they would prefer that 2026, which would be the second year of the new extension beyond the fifth year options, or for guys like Brian Branch, the first year, 2027 be the first year that those numbers rise. So depending on how they're trying to line that up, there may not be a perfect spot to balance this contract, but seemingly the best way to do it would be a 2027 be the highest cap number based on the way that it's set now, but it would also have to have a significant out, just like Spillane, who only has $3 million in dead money if he's cut in 2027 with $10 million saved, to at least carry that flexibility, but push the number in a spot that right now has the most flexibility for the Lions, unless, of course, you decide to go to like 2028.
That would, to me, on a timing perspective, probably make the most sense for where the Lions are at, especially if they moved off some of their veterans next season, because then they would have the 2026 cap freed up as well. So timing-wise, I think the 2-year deal would be ideal, 2-year extension on top of the year that you already have right now. I'm kind of looking at it from both perspectives here, and we'll get to some of the number ideas. Look at the Lions linebacker position. We know they re-signed Derek Barnes to the 3-year, $24 million deal. They like Derek Barnes. They like his flexibility. He only played really 3 games this past season, then was injured. Really didn't play that many games, but played a few games this past season, was pretty great early in the season, showed a ton of flexibility, was on the field a lot, was utilized as a third down piece a lot with Alex Anzalone. Jack Campbell came off the field so he could blitz. Maybe he'd play some of your underneath man coverage assignments like on running backs, and that was kind of his role there, right? More underneath things, but also just getting after the quarterback. But he was a very big part of the defense early, and he played really well. So when you think about him getting the 3-year contract, and you start to look at this situation, one of the things that catches my eye is the potential of the Lions, looking at it from the perspective of what's our best defensive unit that we can put on the field. And this came to mind because going back and watching those early games this past season, Barnes played a lot. Now, Barnes is, of course, our sandbacker, but he can play off ball, play on the ball. He kind of bounces around, but he's our sandbacker. Lions on the strong side of the formation, a lot of times the field side, and Alex Anzalone to that will backer spot, but he plays on the ball too. Again, a lot of things that Cunningham can bring to the table, Alex Anzalone more assets to the table in terms of play style, so it makes sense the Lions would have went out and signed Cunningham in the meantime. But I think if you look at it, one of the things in favor of Alex Anzalone is seeing how much Barnes played at the beginning of the season, Zamik Robertson at the beginning of the season. The Lions used a lot of 3 linebacker sets. Now, if you go to like the LA Rams game, about the second half, they switched to a lot more Amik Robertson, started to see the field more so in the second half. But it wasn't just that the Lions were playing 3 linebacker sets against, say, 12 personnel where you typically would, right? 2 tight ends on the field, 1 back. All right, we'll go 3 linebackers, we'll play base packages. Even then, some teams don't do that. Like Buffalo's still going to play nickel all the time. But the Lions played a lot of base defense early in this past season, even when they were getting 11 personnel looks by the LA Rams. And when I see that, I couldn't help but ask myself, did the Lions feel like this was the best package that they could get on the field versus a lot of matchups? Is that, hey, our best 11 on the field a lot of times includes both Alex Anzalone and Derek Barnes versus, and it could be just because, Meek was new, but that's the best unit versus having a Meek Robertson say in the slot. Our best unit's actually going with those three linebackers that we really like because of the flexibility that all of those guys have across the board: coverage, run defense, blitzing. It also makes you question, is that part of the reason that the run defense took a step back in terms of expected points added as a run defense from the advanced statistics, because you didn't have those linebackers healthy? We know that was a big part of it, but also getting out of some of those personnel packages potentially. So when I go back and I look at that, I can't help but ask myself, do the Lions feel like that's the best unit they have? Because if you look around the league, right, 12 personnel, teams like the LA Rams are going to use it a lot, right? They went out, their first pick was a tight end, a lot of 12 personnel. They even said in their draft video. And if you look across the league, teams like Philly play 12 personnel about 30% of the time. San Fran does it 35% of the time, right? Two of the better teams you would think in the NFC. Minnesota, Green Bay are sitting at 24%, so it's only 1/4 of the time. Washington's at 23%. So not the primary package for really any team, but teams do use it, usually at worst about a quarter of the time. And if you look at the Lions this past season, they saw 12 personnel 23% of the time. But in terms of EPA defensively, the Lions were actually at their worst defending 12 personnel this past season. EPA-wise, that was the worst personnel package they defended this past season, was teams that played 12 personnel. And again, I think having your injuries at linebacker played a big part in that. But just seeing how the Lions approached it this last season, one of the things the Lions could be weighing is there a significant difference to having Alex, Barnes, Campbell versus a guy like Meek Robertson more consistently in the slot? Because a lot of teams are still going to lean into 11 personnel, but is it more valuable for us to instead play more of those base packages? Do we like that much more than that? Is there a significant difference between those two things for us? Obviously, they bring different strengths, but if there is, that could definitely lean into the favor of the Lions saying, hey, we want to get this thing done, because that makes him a core piece for us. Because if you look at last season to see how much those two guys played alongside each other, Barnes and Alex, I think it spoke a lot of volumes. It wasn't just base down, it was also on third down. See, those two guys kind of held it down. Now, Alex's value, you watch the film and we know how valuable this guy is. Of course, with Campbell, it's super valuable because Campbell's not a great man coverage piece. Alex is a very good man coverage linebacker. So those two offset and balance each other out really well. Barnes, who played in man coverage and gotten better, he's still not great, man. Still doesn't take a majority of the snaps in man coverage. So it's still not like an area that he excels. I think he's gotten better there, but it's nowhere near like an area that I would say he excels in man coverage. And that's just for some of the fluidity that he lacks. He can run with guys, but he's not overly fluid. Watch Alex Anzalone, you still love the way that he plays. Just going back to this past season, like the discipline that he plays with, that to me right now, he's still the best man coverage backer the Lions have. Adding Zach Cunningham helps because I think he's a plus player there, but I think Zach Cunningham's even better in zone coverage. Like, he's a really nice pass coverage piece, but to me, Alex Anzalone, refreshing myself, and then after I just did the Cunningham video, I would still take Alex Anzalone as a man coverage piece just in general. His agility that he has, and you'll see this when he works in the backfield as a rusher, the agility that he has in coverage, the way that he can stick with guys to the top of the route is much more fluid than a guy like Zach Cunningham. He may not have the same burst as a Cunningham, which is fair, right? I think there's maybe a little more athletic burst there to Zach's game, and he's a little bit longer as well, which I think hurts Alex at times. But Alex, to me, is much more fluid in those spots, and we know he's super instinctive. The ability to go from playing the run to rushing the passer, right, to dropping off a receiver to go rush the passer. The instincts that he has against the run to say, okay, I got to get outside and hold the edge here. He's disciplined, and he's very instinctive, and he plays very fast. He's very quick to just make decisions, quick to process, and he has some of those instinctive plays that you miss when he's not on the field, where he just goes above and beyond and finds a way to make something happen. That's what he's capable of. Again, he could play all over the field, on the ball, off the ball. He played in some Sam backer roles when Jalen Reeves-Maybin came into the game this past season, so flexibility is there. He transitions really well. There's some twitch to his game. Great job of staying square. Plays with great discipline in terms of the pad level that he plays with the run defender. He just plays too far beyond the line of scrimmage at times. And again, he's not really like a consistent stack and shed piece as often. He's not consistent there. It's not where he's going to dominate. That's more of the Campbell realm. It's important what he has in front of him, because that's not where he wants to live. If he's constantly having linemen in his lap, he's not going to be the same person against the run. He's much more of an instinctive piece, but he's got great eye balance and coverage, balanced in coverage. From a player perspective, I think Alex Anzalone still has a lot of things that you want. His value is so much of what he brings in coverage, because it makes Jack Campbell better, because Campbell's really good in zone. He's not a man coverage piece. You don't want him consistently doing that. Alex is the guy that makes that work. So if you think about third downs, if you don't have Alex, it's Derek Barnes and it's Jack Campbell. Okay, that's okay, right? You can make that work, but now you're putting a lot of stress on Barnes to deal with tight ends one-on-one, or you're asking Campbell to do that. And unless those guys take big strides, you're legitimately downgrading there, or you have to put just different personnel on the field. Now you're going extra safety, extra DB. Maybe that's Avonte Maddox. Now it's becoming that piece, and it's no longer the linebacker. So it's not saying that you can't find ways to do it, but it's something I've thought of just looking at it from a perspective of seeing how the Lions approached it last season. I could see where they could see in their eyes, it's not just even personnel-wise, their best defensive formation, a lot of times, their best 11 is going to include those three linebackers on the field together. Not one or the other, not Barnes out the field and Alex is out there. all three of those guys on the field together versus having a Meek more on the field, about 30 snaps a game. But if you look at it, as soon as Derek Barnes went down, he played 52 snaps and then 57 snaps before getting back to about 30 snaps a game. So immediately he saw a big uptick in snap before they started to pull back on it again at that slot cornerback role. So for me, I could see where the Lions could have to really balance out. Do we feel like the value is significantly different in their mind if they feel like that's their best three? If you were looking at a new contract, like I said, I think a 2-year extension would be ideal. I would look at throwing about $14 to $15 million guaranteed into this new contract, somewhere around $20 to $21 million over 2 seasons, somewhere in that range, 20 to 22. You might have to pay a little more based on where the cap's going. I think if you keep it in that range of 10, 11, maybe $12 million per season for 2 years, you make a lot of it guaranteed, about 2/3 plus of it guaranteed. That could be a number that you could feel good about. You could also throw more guarantees onto this year, try to open up that back end a little bit to that third year to give yourself a little bit of a better out. That's the kind of contract that I think would potentially work best here. And that's maybe the range that I think both teams, if they could get to a number they agreed upon, that would be a spot that could be that could work for both sides. It's just kind of a thought exercise, but I look at it almost like this too. If we look at it from a financial perspective, when you think about long term here, what's going to cost more? Well, I think you could make the case that Alex would cost more very likely than it would be just paying a slot cornerback. Meaning that if you look at the highest paid slot corners the last couple of years, Teron Johnson ended up being the highest paid slot at one point. It was just over $10 million a season. Now we've gotten Chicago's slot cornerback, Kyler Gordon, who's fantastic. They use him a ton, probably more than 2/3 of the snaps, I would assume. He plays on the field a ton. Kyler Gordon, 3 years, $40 million. That's the top end of that position. So Alex, while he may not make that in comparison, if he makes over 10 million, solidly over $10 million per year, you could be looking at it saying, well, it's actually just much cheaper for us to pay a guy like Amik Robertson versus a guy like Alex Anzalone for multiple seasons. If we like Amik in the slot this upcoming season, he plays well, then we'll just roll with Amik Robertson. We'll give him the extension because it's probably going to be cheaper for us based on his position, and he brings us flexibility there. And then that can allow the Lions to sit back and say, we're going to be patient with you, Alex. We don't necessarily want to rush to a deal. Maybe there's a number they're still willing to pay, but they're not going to go maybe super far beyond that number because they have a backup plan, essentially. Like, we're comfortable with not going that far because we think financially long-term, it actually is going to be a lot more manageable to pay that position versus paying this position. We'll just lean more into the nickel sets, and we're comfortable with Jack and Derek Barnes holding it down. And then we get to those third downs, we'll go with the defensive back. And that kind of flips it back to the original point of like, okay, well, what's the best 11? I look at it also like this, though. I look at it from the flip side. The Lions having a guy like Rakestraw specifically work on the outside makes me think that the Lions could be also saying to themselves, hey, long-term here, paying a guy like Alex Anzalone, if that does happen, if we get him for an extra couple of seasons, it would make some sense to work Rakestraw out wide because that slot position, while it's still a valuable part of this defense, and you obviously have to have that position because you're just not going to not use it, it is a spot, though, it makes more sense to actually work with Rakestraw on the outside because for us, we know DJ Reed's locked in. We also know Terrion's locked in. And if Brian Branch is at safety, which is Brian Branch really allows all this to happen because Branch's flexibility, you can put him on a slot receiver. Like, he's flexible enough to do that. If Lions love him because of that, and they're assuming they're going to pay him. Now, if Lions were like, hey, we're not going to pay Brian Branch, just changes everything. You're not going to pay Brian Branch. You definitely should play Alex Anzalone. But I assume that they will after he plays really well. And his flexibility is so good to go cover guys that they can call him a safety and he can step down and take a slot even when they're in base packages. Most teams can't do that. They would just have to be like, oh, we're playing zone. Lions can still play man because they'll just put him on a receiver one-on-one and they're comfortable with that. And Kirby's got a lot better there. So this flexibility allows this to happen. But to me, just to take a prediction, the fact that you have a guy like Rakestraw working out wide makes me think that they're looking at potentially, hey, we really want to get back Alex Anzalone here because, and they may not rush into it, but just because of this. If you went forward and say you got a deal done with Alex Anzalone, your focus could be, hey, Rakestraw, work out wide because, look, going forward, our 2 starting corners are going to be DJ Reed and Terrion, very likely. But when teams do go with multiple receivers and we want to get a third corner on the field, we can just take DJ Reed and kick him inside. Now, Rakestraw, where we feel you're going to be at your best is out wide. So it's not like DJ Reed's losing a role because we know he's going to start and he's going to be locked in for the next few seasons. But instead, it's just, hey, you're the wide corner until we need to put an extra corner on the field. Then we'll just push him inside and Rakestraw steps on the field. I feel like the best spot for Rakestraw ultimately is going to be wide. That could be the way to get to it. It's not minimizing DJ's role. DJ just moves a little bit. I know he hasn't played much slot. I think he has the skill set to do it. And if the Lions view that as well, knowing that he's going to be on the field regardless, why work a guy like Rakestraw in the slot as much as we should just focus on him out wide? Because long term, that's how this is going to work. Because Reed's not going to come off the field. Have him, and let's just look at it from a longer term perspective, or even if it was for this year, if you didn't have him, you'd probably see more Meek, which is something they could feel comfortable with. Maybe the drop off to them isn't that significant. Maybe there is no drop off. Avante would be incredibly valuable now all of a sudden on third down because he'd have to be a matchup piece for you. You would assume he's going to have to play a big role in those spots because you're not going to have a backer that's great in man coverage. Just don't have that guy, or it's Zach Cunningham. The Lions feel comfortable with, like, hey, Alex Anzalone, it's great to have him, but we don't think it's like, hey, if we don't have him, we can't make this thing work, because they could feel comfortable with where they're at as a run defense when they have two backers on the field. If there is no Anzalone, they could feel comfortable with Barnes and Jack Campbell as their two backers if they lived in nickel. I could understand that completely, because both those guys, you can make the case, are better run defenders just on their skill sets alone. I could see them being comfortable with that. It's just more so on the downs where it's run or pass, the balance that you have there. I think they can be patient to getting this new deal done. They could set a number that's, they're standing by, even if they wanted to get a long-term deal done or an extension, where it's, hey, we're going to be patient on this. We're not going to rush into giving this extension. We'll sign Cunningham in the meantime, and we're going to have him because he does a lot of what Anzalone does, and then we'll just see how this shakes out. And if it can get done, great. And if it doesn't get done or things go completely sideways, that's our fallback option. And the Lions could be comfortable with that. They would just have to be comfortable with saying, we're going to be playing a lot more nickel this upcoming season, potentially. I think that might be where this ends up going. I don't look at Barnes as the Alex Anzalone replacement, but I think if you were trying to find Anzalone replacement, it's not a single player. It's the identity of how the Lions do things defensively that would be the Alex Anzalone replacement. That's what the replacement is. It's how you do things as a whole, not as a singular player, because I don't think the Lions have a singular player that brings what Alex does. It'd be as a group, you'd have to figure it out. So my guess is, I think an extension is going to happen. I think based on these numbers, I think an extension would get done. I think somewhere around the $10 million per year range for a couple of seasons. I think it's going to happen. That's my early guess. I have no idea. I don't think it'll happen anytime soon, because I think the Lions are comfortable with being patient. I think they're comfortable with being patient because they believe they have the flexibility, and they think Cunningham is a really nice fallback option. And to me, them getting that done tells me they're not rushing into anything. Them signing Cunningham tells me that they're cool with being patient, confident with, and then having Alex Anzalone work towards that number. That's my guess. We'll see how it shakes out. With that being said, that's my early thoughts. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you, Prop, for watching, and I'm out.